My name is Peggy, and at 68 years old, I never expected to start over. After my son James and his wife Tara hit financial troubles, I welcomed them into my Connecticut home. What was supposed to be temporary stretched into 7 long years. When they won $87 million in the lottery, I thought our problems were finally over. Instead, I watched in shock as my belongings rained down from my second-story window. If you want to hear how this nightmare turned around, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to see more stories of family betrayal and unexpected comebacks. My story really begins 10 years ago, when my husband Michael passed away from a sudden heart attack. We had been married for 38 wonderful years. Michael was a financial advisor who made sure I would be taken care of if anything happened to him. He left me our family home completely paid off, a solid retirement account, and enough insurance money that I never had to worry about finances. What he could not prepare me for was the crushing loneliness that followed his departure. James was our only child. He was always intelligent but somewhat dependent on us, even as an adult. Michael used to worry about him, saying that James needed to develop more backbone. I always defended our son, believing that his sensitive nature was a virtue rather than a weakness. Looking back now, I see that my husband had recognized something I had refused to acknowledge. James met Tara at a friend's wedding 9 years ago, and they married within 6 months. She was pretty with long auburn hair and a charming smile that could light up a room. Initially, I was thrilled that my son had found someone who seemed to bring him out of his shell. During those early days, Tara was pleasant and respectful toward me. She would send me birthday cards with handwritten notes and call occasionally to check in. I remember thinking how fortunate I was to have such a thoughtful daughter-in-law. Everything changed about 2 years into their marriage, when the economic downturn hit our area particularly hard. James, who worked in marketing for a local company, was laid off, along with half of the staff. Their apartment in downtown Hartford was too expensive to maintain on just Tara's part-time income as a yoga instructor. One Sunday afternoon, while they visited for dinner, James looked particularly stressed. His eyes had dark circles underneath them, and he barely touched the pot roast I had prepared, which had always been his favorite. "Mom," he said, finally pushing his plate away, "we might have to move out of state to find work. The job market here is terrible." My heart sank at the thought of my only child moving away, especially when I was still adjusting to life without Michael. Without giving it much thought, I made the offer that would change everything. "Why not stay here with me for a while?" I suggested. "I have plenty of room in this big house. You can save on rent while looking for a new position locally." The relief on both their faces was immediate. Tara reached across the table and squeezed my hand with tears in her eyes. "Peggy, that is so generous," she said. "I promise it would just be for a few months until we get back on our feet. We will help with groceries and utilities, of course." James nodded enthusiastically. "We would be so careful not to disturb your routine, Mom. And as soon as I find something stable, we will be out of your hair." I was actually excited at the prospect. My 4-bedroom colonial had felt cavernous since Michael died. Having family around again might fill some of the silence that had become my constant companion. Perhaps Tara and James would even decide to start a family while living here, and I could have the joy of being an involved grandmother rather than one who only saw her grandchildren on holidays. They moved in the following weekend, bringing only essential belongings and storing the rest. I helped them settle into the guest bedroom suite upstairs, which had its own bathroom. James looked around at the space with appreciation. "This is so kind of you, Mom. I promise we will make it up to you." Those first few months were pleasant. Tara took over cooking dinner several nights a week, introducing me to vegetarian recipes I would never have tried on my own. James fixed small things around the house that I had neglected since Michael passed. We watched movies together in the evenings and took walks around the neighborhood on weekends. During those early days, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. My maternal instincts found satisfaction in helping my son and his wife through a difficult time. I enjoyed having people to talk to over morning coffee and someone to share the day's small victories and frustrations with at dinner. The first tiny indication that something might be amiss came around month 4 of their stay. I had made a comment about a job opening at the local community college that might suit James's qualifications. Tara's smile tightened slightly. James needs something that really values his talents, not just any job. Rushing into the wrong position could damage his career trajectory. It seemed reasonable enough at the time, and I nodded in agreement. But that same week, I noticed Tara had rearranged the living room furniture without asking and replaced some of my decorative pillows with her own. When I mentioned it, she said I thought it would be nice to freshen things up a bit. This place was looking a little dated. I smiled and thanked her, ignoring the small sting of her words. After all, they were making an effort to contribute in non-financial ways, and I told myself that was what mattered. Looking back, I can see these were the first small seeds of entitlement taking root, but at the time I was simply happy not to be alone. 6 months into their stay, I began to notice that neither James nor Tara seemed to be actively pursuing employment. When I would gently ask about job applications or interviews over breakfast, their answers became increasingly vague. "The economy is still recovering," James would mumble into his coffee. "The job market is soul-crushing right now," Tara would add. "We need to practice self-care, or we will burn out from the constant rejection." I tried to be understanding. After all, job hunting could be demoralizing, and I wanted to be supportive. But as weeks turned into months with no apparent progress, I started to wonder if they were even trying. One evening, I decided to broach the subject more directly. We had just finished dinner, a meal I had prepared despite it being Tara's turn according to our loose schedule. I was thinking, I said carefully, that it might be good to set some goals for the next few months. "Perhaps we could discuss your plans." Tara immediately stiffened. "Are you saying we have overstayed our welcome?" "Not at all." I backpedaled, feeling suddenly anxious. "I just want to help if I can. Maybe I could connect you with some of Michael's old colleagues in finance, James." "Mom, please." James sighed, looking uncomfortable. "I do not want to work in finance. We have been through this." "I am just trying to help," I said. "Well, it feels like pressure," Tara snapped. "We are adults. We do not need to report our job search progress to you." James placed a hand on Tara's arm. "She means well, honey." "I know she means well," Tara said, her tone softening artificially. "But Peggy needs to understand that finding meaningful employment takes time in this economy." I nodded and dropped the subject, but something had shifted. From that point on, I felt a growing tension in my own home, as if I were walking on eggshells. As their 7th month under my roof began, I noticed more changes. Items around the house were being moved or replaced without discussion. My antique coffee table that Michael and I had purchased on our 20th anniversary trip to Vermont was suddenly relegated to the basement, replaced by a modern glass piece Tara had ordered online. That old wood was collecting dust, and aggravating my allergies was her explanation when I questioned the change. The guest room they occupied was completely transformed, with walls repainted from my preferred soft yellow to a stark white. My gardening magazines disappeared from the reading basket in the sunroom, replaced by Tara's yoga and wellness publications. Most concerning was James's behavior. My once engaging son became increasingly withdrawn, spending hours in their room playing video games or staring at his phone. When we were together, he rarely spoke unless prompted, and he never spent time with me alone anymore. If I asked him to help with a household task, he would glance at Tara first, as if seeking permission. The 1-year anniversary of their temporary stay passed without acknowledgement. No thank you, no discussion of future plans, not even a mention of the milestone. I felt increasingly invisible in my own home. My friend Elaine noticed the change in me during our weekly lunch. "Peggy, you look exhausted," she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "Is everything okay with James and Tara?" I hesitated before answering. There was something shameful about admitting that my own son and his wife were taking advantage of me. "They are still job hunting," I said finally. Elaine raised an eyebrow. "For a whole year in this job market, something does not add up." "The economy is difficult right now." I repeated the excuse I had heard so many times. "The economy is not that difficult," Elaine countered. "My son-in-law found a new position within 2 months of looking, and he does not have half the education James does." I stirred my soup, not meeting her eyes. "I think Tara wants him to hold out for something with advancement potential." "And what does Tara do all day while he is holding out Elaine?" asked pointedly. The truth was, I was not entirely sure. Tara spent most mornings doing yoga in the sunroom and afternoons on her laptop, supposedly building her wellness brand online. But a year had passed, with no apparent income from these efforts. "She is working on establishing herself as a wellness influencer," I said, aware of how flimsy it sounded. Elaine gave me a look that was both sympathetic and concerned. "Peggy, you cannot let them take advantage of your kindness forever. Have they contributed anything financially this whole time?" I shook my head slowly. "They offered initially, but always have a reason why they cannot right now. Next month, they say. After the next interview, once Tara's website starts generating revenue. And you are covering all the groceries, utilities, everything." I nodded, feeling a flush of embarrassment creep up my neck. "Oh," Peggy Elaine sighed. "You need to set some boundaries before this gets worse." But even as she said it, I was already making excuses in my mind. They were family. Times were hard. Things would change soon. I just needed to be patient a little longer. Looking back, I realize I was in denial. I did not want to admit that my own son might be using me or that I had misjudged Tara so completely. It was easier to keep hoping things would improve than to face the painful reality of my situation. As we entered the second year of our living arrangement, what had once been uncomfortable became nearly unbearable. Not only was there still no financial contribution from James or Tara, but their presence had expanded to dominate every aspect of my home and life. My utility bills had nearly doubled with their constant use of electricity, water, and heat. Tara took 30-minute showers twice daily as part of her wellness routine. James kept his gaming equipment running at all hours. The thermostat was perpetually adjusted to Tara's preference regardless of the cost. Grocery expenses spiraled as Tara insisted on organic everything and specialty ingredients for her recipes. When I gently suggested more budget-friendly options, she looked at me with barely concealed disdain. "I cannot compromise on nutrition, Peggy. Perhaps you should reconsider your own diet. It might help with your energy levels." By year 3, Tara had essentially taken control of household decisions. She rearranged the kitchen cabinets to her liking, disposed of dishes she deemed outdated, and established rigid rules about when laundry could be done. My attempts to maintain some authority in my own home were met with sighs and eye-rolling. "This would be so much easier if you could just adapt to more modern ways of doing things," she would say, as if my preferences were simply outdated inconveniences. James retreated further into himself, spending most of his time in their room playing online games or watching videos. When I did see him, he seemed gray and diminished somehow. The spark that had once defined my son appeared extinguished. If I tried to talk to him alone, Tara would inevitably appear, inserting herself into the conversation. "We were just discussing that new opportunity in Boston," she might say, though no such discussion had occurred. By the 4th year, I realized with horror that I had become a stranger in my own home. I took meals in my room more often than not, avoiding the tension that filled the dining room. I carefully timed my use of common areas around Tara's schedule to minimize conflict. My once beautiful garden lay neglected because Tara had repurposed my gardening shed for her meditation space. The financial strain was becoming serious as well. My retirement savings, which Michael had so carefully planned to last my lifetime, were being depleted at an alarming rate. I found myself canceling my book club membership, foregoing small luxuries, and even delaying some medical checkups to accommodate the increased expenses. One Thursday afternoon during year 4, I returned from grocery shopping to find 6 unfamiliar cars parked in my driveway and along the street. Inside, Tara was hosting some sort of gathering in my living room. 12 women sat in a circle on yoga mats, while Tara led them through breathing exercises. "Just set the groceries in the kitchen, Peggy," she said without looking up. "We will be done in about an hour." I stood frozen grocery bags heavy in my arms as several strangers glanced at me with mild curiosity. No introduction, no explanation, not even the courtesy of asking permission to use my home for what was clearly a paid class, judging by the cash box on the side table. That night, when I tried to discuss the incident with James, he shrugged listlessly. "Tara is building her business, Mom. She needs to establish herself with local clients. But in our home, without asking, I felt like an intruder walking into my own living room. It is not just your home anymore, he said quietly. We live here too. Those words cut deep, partly because of the entitlement they revealed, and partly because they confirmed what I had feared they had no intention of leaving. My health began to suffer under the constant stress. My blood pressure, which had always been normal, crept up to concerning levels. I developed insomnia, lying awake at night, listening to the sounds of my hijacked home. Headaches became frequent companions, and I noticed my hands would shake when confrontations with Tara seemed imminent. During year 5, I made one last desperate attempt to discuss the situation. I prepared James's favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes with real maple syrup, and waited until Tara left for her morning run. James, I said gently, we need to talk about the future. He looked up from his phone with wary eyes. What about it? It has been 5 years since you moved in. I am wondering what your plans are. Plans, he repeated as if the concept was foreign. Yes, plans. For finding your own place. For supporting yourselves. He set down his fork. Is this about money? Because Tara thinks you are financially secure enough that this should not be an issue. I took a deep breath. This is about more than money, though. Yes, supporting 3 adults was not part of my retirement plan. This is about you and Tara taking responsibility for your own lives. So you are kicking us out, his voice rose slightly, a hint of the guilt manipulation I had come to recognize. No, James. I am asking you to make a plan, to set some goals and a timeline. We cannot just manufacture jobs out of thin air, Mom, he said, his tone hardening. And it is pretty selfish to throw your only son out when the economy is still recovering. The economy has been recovering for years now, I said, my own frustration finally showing. Other people are finding work. Your friends from college are established in careers. What makes your situation different? His face darkened. I did not realize you were keeping score against my friends. Thanks for the reminder that I am a disappointment. That is not what I meant, I protested. It is exactly what you meant, he snapped, pushing back from the table. You think I enjoy living in my mother's house at my age? You think this is what I planned for my life? Before I could respond, the front door opened, and Tara appeared in the kitchen doorway, her timing so perfect, I wondered if she had been listening from the porch. What is going on? She demanded, looking between us. Mom thinks we are taking advantage of her, James said. She wants us out. Tara's expression shifted to one of hurt so practiced, it might have been convincing if I hadn't spent 5 years observing her manipulations. After everything we have done around here, she asked. After all the improvements we have made to this outdated house. After I have cooked and cleaned and kept you company when you would otherwise be all alone. I never said I wanted you out immediately. I tried to clarify. I just want us to discuss a timeline. A timeline for expelling your own family, Tara said, her voice thick with manufactured emotion. Do you hear yourself, Peggy? Do you know how many older women would be grateful to have family living with them instead of being abandoned in some facility? And there it was. The ultimate manipulation, implied threats of my future loneliness, suggestions that I should be grateful for their presence, regardless of how they treated me. The conversation ended with James storming out and Tara giving me the silent treatment for days afterward. It was the last time I attempted to address the situation directly. By years 5 through 7, my role in the household had deteriorated from homeowner to something between housekeeper and unwelcome guest. Tara no longer maintained even a veneer of respect toward me. Her comments became openly dismissive, often laced with subtle jabs about my age or habits. Did you reorganize the pantry again, Peggy? She might say, with an exaggerated sigh. We had finally gotten it set up efficiently. I suppose older people need their routines, though. Or, that outfit is certainly age-appropriate. Have you ever considered updating your wardrobe? Just because you are in your 60s does not mean you need to dress like it is the 1980s. These comments were always delivered with a thin smile that did not reach her eyes, often in front of James, who remained silent or sometimes even nodded in agreement. His transformation from the loving son I had raised to this passive stranger broke my heart daily. Increasingly, Tara would simply ignore my presence entirely. She would walk into a room where I was reading, turn on the television at high volume without acknowledging me, and act annoyed if I asked her to lower it. If I tried to join a conversation between her and James, they would exchange glances and suddenly remember something they needed to do elsewhere. The isolation was perhaps the cruelest aspect of those years. Where once I had maintained an active social life with friends and community activities, I gradually withdrew out of embarrassment over my situation. How could I explain to my friends that my son and his wife had essentially taken over my home while contributing nothing, that I lacked the courage or means to change the situation? My friend Elaine continued to check in, but I made excuses to avoid having her visit the house. The few times she did come over, Tara made the experience so uncomfortable with her territorial behavior that Elaine stopped suggesting it. "You can always come stay with Bill and me for a while," Elaine offered during one of our increasingly rare lunch outings. "Just to get a break." I appreciated her concern, but could not imagine leaving Tara and James unsupervised in my home for any length of time. Who knew what would be changed, discarded, or damaged in my absence? These fears were not unfounded. Personal items had begun to go missing. A silver bracelet Michael had given me on our 15th anniversary disappeared from my jewelry box. Family photos were removed from walls to make room for Tara's abstract art prints. Even my gardening tools vanished one by one, apparently donated to a community garden because you do not use them anymore anyway. The most painful incident occurred during year 6 when I discovered that Michael's vintage watch, a family heirloom from his grandfather, was no longer in the dresser drawer where I kept it. When confronted, James eventually admitted he had pawned it during a particularly tight month when Tara wanted to attend a wellness retreat in Vermont. "I was going to buy it back," he claimed, eyes downcast. "I just needed a little cash to keep Tara happy. You know how she gets when she feels deprived." I stood in stunned silence, unable to process that my son had stolen and sold one of my most treasured connections to my late husband. The watch was irreplaceable, its value far beyond monetary. "I will make it right," Mom James promised, his voice quavering slightly. "When things turn around, I will find one just like it." But his apology rang hollow, and no replacement ever materialized. Instead, within days, Tara had orchestrated a minor household crisis that drew attention away from James's transgression, and the matter was swept aside like so many other betrayals. By year 7, my financial situation had become dire enough to prompt a consultation with a financial advisor. Michael's careful planning had never accounted for supporting 3 adults for 7 years, with no end in sight. The advisor's expression grew increasingly grave as we reviewed my accounts. "Mrs. Harrison," he said finally, setting down his pen at the current rate of withdrawal, "your retirement savings will be depleted much earlier than projected. You need to either reduce expenses significantly or consider options for additional income." "What options would those be at my age?" I asked, trying to keep the desperation from my voice. "Selling your home would be the most straightforward solution," he replied. "It has appreciated considerably since you and your husband purchased it. You could downsize to something more manageable and reinvest the difference." The suggestion made perfect sense financially, but struck me as profoundly unfair. This was the home where Michael and I had built our life together. It held 30 years of memories within its walls. Now I was being advised to sell it because my adult son and his wife refused to support themselves. As I drove home from that appointment, I calculated that I had spent nearly $100,000 supporting James and Tara over the 7 years they had lived with me. This figure did not include the non-monetary costs, my diminished health, lost friendships, and the constant emotional stress of living as an unwelcome guest in my own home. My bedroom had become my sanctuary, the only space Tara had not completely colonized, though she had suggested several times that it could use updating. I spent increasingly long hours there, avoiding interactions that left me feeling belittled and unwanted. I read books, watched programs on my small bedroom television, and sometimes just sat by the window watching the neighborhood children play, wondering how my life had devolved to this point. What had happened to the son I raised? The boy who once made me Mother's Day cards with earnest poems inside, who had cried on my shoulder after his first heartbreak, who had promised his father on his deathbed that he would always look out for me. Now he barely met my eyes at the breakfast table if he acknowledged me at all. And what would Michael think of the situation? My late husband had been a kind man but never a pushover. He would have addressed this long before it reached such extremes. His absence had never felt more acute than during these difficult years when I needed his strength and clarity. As year 7 drew to a close, I found myself at a crossroads. My financial advisor had made it clear that decisions could not be postponed much longer. My doctor had warned that my blood pressure and stress levels were reaching dangerous territory. Something would have to change. I had no idea that change would come in the form of a lottery ticket and a betrayal so complete it would finally force me to reclaim my life. It was a Tuesday evening in April when everything changed. I was preparing a simple dinner, chopping vegetables at the kitchen counter, when I heard an unusual commotion from the living room. James was shouting, and Tara was making high-pitched squealing sounds I had never heard from her before. Concerned, I hurried to see what was happening. They were both staring at the television, jumping up and down and embracing each other with wild abandon. "What is going on?" I asked, wiping my hands on a dish towel. James turned to me, his face flushed with excitement. "We won. We actually won." "Won what?" I asked, confused by their behavior. "The lottery." Tara screamed, her eyes wide and manic. $87 million. We are rich." I stood frozen in shock as they continued their celebration, trying to process this unexpected development. James had occasionally purchased lottery tickets, something I considered a waste of money given their financial situation, but I had never said anything about it. "Are you sure?" I finally managed to ask. "Have you double-checked the numbers?" Yes, Tara exclaimed, waving a ticket in the air. "All 6 numbers match exactly. We just watched them announce it live." For the first time in years, James approached and hugged me spontaneously. "Can you believe it, Mom? All our problems are solved." I hugged him back, feeling a surge of relief wash over me. Perhaps this windfall would indeed solve our problems. They could move out and establish their own home. Our relationship might even heal once the financial pressures were removed. I might finally reclaim my space and what remained of my retirement years. "That is wonderful news," I said sincerely. "Congratulations to you both." We stayed up later than usual that night, discussing what they might do with the money. James talked about buying a house, perhaps, in that exclusive lakeside community he had always admired. Tara's plans were more extravagant, involving travel, shopping sprees, and possibly a second home in California. I listened quietly, offering occasional congratulations, but mostly observing the transformation that seemed to be occurring before my eyes. There was a new energy to both of them, a vibrancy I had not seen in years. James stood taller, spoke more confidently. Tara's usual tension seemed replaced by an almost manic exuberance. "We should celebrate," Tara declared around midnight. "Let us open that bottle of champagne you have been saving." The bottle in question was one Michael and I had purchased on our last anniversary before his death. I had been saving it for some truly special occasion, perhaps James's first child or another meaningful milestone. But their excitement was so palpable that I found myself nodding in agreement. As we toasted their good fortune, Tara looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. Something calculating flickered behind her smile, but I dismissed it as a trick of the light or my own tired imagination. "To new beginnings," she said, clinking her glass against mine. I went to bed that night feeling cautiously optimistic for the first time in years. Perhaps this unexpected blessing would restore some balance to our lives. I even allowed myself to imagine my home returned to me peaceful and orderly once again. I fell asleep easier than I had in months. The next morning I was awakened by unusual sounds coming from upstairs. Thumps and scrapes like furniture being moved. Concerned, I put on my robe and made my way up to the second floor. The door to the room where James and Tara slept was open, and inside was a scene of chaos. Drawers had been emptied onto the bed, clothes were being stuffed into suitcases, and Tara was directing James like a drill sergeant. "Grab the expensive stuff first," she was saying. We can buy whatever else we need. What is happening? I asked from the doorway. Are you going somewhere? Tara turned to me, and the expression on her face made my blood run cold. Gone was any pretense of warmth or respect. Her eyes were hard, her mouth twisted in a sneer I had never seen so openly displayed. Well, look who is finally awake, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. Yes, Peggy, we are going somewhere. We are going anywhere that is not here. James did not look at me, continuing to pack with his head down. I do not understand, I said, confusion and alarm rising within me. You are leaving right now, without any plan. Tara laughed, a harsh sound, nothing like her usual calculated chuckle. We have $87 million. We do not need plans. We can stay in the finest hotels while we house hunt. But surely there is no rush, I said, looking to James for some explanation. You need to contact lottery officials. Get legal advice. Already done, Tara said dismissively. We called the lottery commission last night after you went to bed. We are meeting with them this afternoon to start the claiming process. James, I said, still hoping my son would offer some reasonable explanation for this sudden exodus. He finally looked up, his expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. We need to do this, Mom. We need our own space now that we can afford it. Of course you do, I agreed, trying to keep my voice steady. I completely understand that. I just thought you might take some time to properly plan your move. Tara made a derisive noise and walked past me into the hallway. I followed her, increasingly concerned by her behavior. She entered my bedroom without asking and began opening drawers and closets. What are you doing in my room? I asked, my confusion turning to alarm. Looking for the jewelry box, she said without turning around. The one with those pearl earrings. I want to wear them to our meeting with the lottery people. Those were my mother's pearls, I said, stepping between Tara and my dresser. They are not yours to take. Something in her expression shifted then, as if a mask had been completely removed. The contempt that had always simmered beneath the surface boiled over. Move, she said, her voice low and threatening. When I did not, she shoved past me with enough force to make me stumble against the bed. She yanked open my jewelry box, scattering its contents across the dresser top. Stop this right now, I demanded, finding my voice despite my shock. Those are my personal belongings. Tara ignored me, picking up the pearl earrings and putting them in her pocket. Then she grabbed several other pieces, including the diamond pendant Michael had given me on our 30th anniversary. You have had these things gathering dust for years, she said, pocketing the pendant as well. I will actually wear them and appreciate them. James the First called out, hoping my son would intervene in this blatant theft. He appeared in the doorway, looking uncomfortable but not surprised by his wife's behavior. Tara, maybe leave the jewelry, he said weakly. Why, she snapped. So they can sit here unused for another decade. We are rich now. We deserve nice things. Before I could respond, she brushed past both of us and headed back to their room. I looked at James imploringly. Are you going to let her take my things? Your grandmother's pearls? He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. We will buy you new jewelry, Mom. Better stuff. I felt as if I were in some bizarre nightmare. How could winning the lottery have transformed them so completely in less than 24 hours? But deep down, I knew this was not a transformation at all. It was simply the final unmasking of who they truly were now that they no longer needed to maintain any pretense. I followed them downstairs, trying to make sense of what was happening. Tara was now going through the kitchen cabinets, selecting expensive cookware and placing it by the door. That copper set was a wedding gift from Michael's parents, I protested. And you hardly use it, she replied without looking at me. It is wasted here. I watched in growing horror as they continued to pillage my home, taking whatever caught Tara's fancy art pieces, electronics, even family photos in frames she found attractive. James followed her lead occasionally, suggesting items she might have overlooked. Then Tara went upstairs again, and I heard more movement overhead. I climbed the stairs to find her in my bedroom once more, this time pulling clothes from my closet and tossing them onto the bed. What are you doing now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Making room, she said casually. We will need somewhere to store our new clothes until we move out. Your closet is the biggest. As I watched, she opened my bedroom window and began throwing my clothes out onto the front lawn. Sweaters, dresses, shoes, all tossed carelessly through the open window. "Stop!" I cried, rushing forward. "Those are my clothes." "Old lady clothes," Tara sneered, continuing to empty my closet. "They smell like mothballs and sadness." I tried to grab her arm, but she shook me off easily. At 68, I was no match for a woman in her 30s who did yoga daily. She shoved me aside and continued her destruction. James appeared in the doorway, watching the scene unfold without intervention. "James, please," I begged. "Stop her." He looked between us, his expression conflicted. "Tara, maybe that is enough," he said half-heartedly. "It is nowhere near enough," she replied, now pulling items from my dresser. Undergarments, nightgowns, scarves, all joined the growing pile on the lawn below. 7 years we have lived in this mausoleum, tiptoeing around her precious things, listening to her passive-aggressive sighs, watching her judge us with those disappointed eyes. Her voice had risen to a near shout, her movements becoming more frenzied. She grabbed a framed photo of Michael from my nightstand and held it over the window. "Put that down," I said, my voice suddenly finding strength. "That is not yours to take or destroy." "Oh, Saint Michael," Tara mocked still, holding the photo dangerously close to the window. If only he could see his perfect wife now all alone because she drove away her only son with her constant expectations. "I have given you everything," I said, tears filling my eyes. "My home, my savings, my retirement years. How can you be so cruel?" Tara's expression hardened further. She set the photo down but turned to face me with cold fury in her eyes. "Given us everything, you have held it over our heads every day. Poor Peggy, such a martyr, supporting her useless son and his wife. We have lived like beggars, accepting your charity, listening to your subtle digs about jobs and timelines." "That was never my intention," I protested. "Liar," she spat. "But it does not matter anymore. We do not need your charity now. We are millionaires." She moved closer, her face inches from mine. "You know what the best part is. We never have to pretend to care about you again. No more listening to your boring stories about Michael. No more choking down your bland cooking. No more faking respect for a woman who has done nothing with her life except marry well and then cling to her husband's achievements." Each word struck like a physical blow. I looked to James, silently pleading for him to defend me, to show some sign of the son I had raised. He looked away. "Get out," Tara said, her voice suddenly calm and cold. "Pack whatever pathetic belongings I have not thrown out the window, and get out of our house." "Your house," I repeated, disbelieving. "This is my home. The home Michael and I bought together 30 years ago." Tara laughed, a chilling sound devoid of any warmth. "Not anymore. We are rich now. We will buy it from you. Or maybe we will just wait for you to die, which cannot be too far off given your health." She moved to the doorway where James stood. "We are going to check into the Ritz-Carlton downtown. When we come back, I expect you to be gone. Go die in a nursing home where you belong." The cruelty of her words left me speechless. I looked at my son, this stranger wearing James's face, hoping for some sign of the kind boy I had raised. "James," I whispered. He finally met my eyes, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the son I knew. But then Tara placed a hand on his arm, and his expression hardened. "It is for the best, Mom," he said flatly. "We need our own space now that we can afford it." They turned to leave, but at the doorway I found my voice one last time. "The lottery ticket," I said quietly. "Did you check whose name is on it?" Tara paused, turning back with an annoyed expression. "What are you talking about?" I moved to my bedside table and picked up the framed photo of Michael that Tara had set down. My hands were surprisingly steady as I turned it over and removed the back of the frame. Behind the photo was a small envelope. "The winning ticket," I said, opening the envelope. "Did either of you actually look at the name on it?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed Tara's face for the first time. "James bought it at the convenience store on Main Street. He always buys them there." I removed the lottery ticket from the envelope and held it up. This ticket was purchased at Thompson's Grocery on Elm Street. I bought it as a birthday gift for James, just as I do every year. James took a step forward, his expression changing from dismissive to concerned. What are you saying, Mom? I am saying that this ticket I held at hire was purchased by me in my name with my credit card. I have the receipt right here. I pulled a small slip of paper from the same envelope. Tara lunged forward, trying to snatch the ticket from my hand, but I stepped back quickly. Give me that, she demanded, her voice rising in panic. It has my signature on the back, I continued calmly. As required by state lottery rules for all tickets. I signed it before giving it to you as a gift, James. Just like I do every year for your birthday. James's face had gone pale. But we already called the lottery commission. We have an appointment this afternoon. An appointment you will not be able to keep, I replied, since you are not the legal purchaser or owner of this ticket. Tara's face contorted with rage. You are lying. You are making this up to try to steal our money. I handed the ticket to James, who examined it with growing horror. There, clearly printed on the front, was my name, Margaret Peggy Harrison, and on the back, my signature dated 3 days earlier, the day before James's birthday. I do not understand, James said, his voice small. You gave this to me as a gift. I did, I confirmed. But legally, lottery tickets remain the property of the purchaser, unless officially transferred through the lottery commission. Something I learned years ago when Michael and I used to give tickets as stocking stuffers at Christmas. Tara grabbed the ticket from James and scrutinized it, her hands shaking. This cannot be right. It cannot be. It is, I said simply. The ticket is in my name. The winnings are legally mine. The realization of what this meant seemed to hit them both simultaneously. All their cruel words, their theft of my belongings, their demands that I leave my own home, all based on a windfall that was never legally theirs. Tara's expression shifted rapidly from rage to calculation. She forced her features into a smile that did not reach her eyes. Peggy, we have been under so much stress. Surely you understand that we were not thinking clearly. Of course, this is your ticket, your winnings. But as family, I know you will want to share this blessing with us. The rapid transformation was almost comical, how quickly her vicious contempt dissolved into fawning insincerity. James took a different approach, his eyes filling with tears. Mom, I am so sorry. I did not mean those things. You know how I get when Tara is upset. Please forgive me. I looked between them, seeing clearly for the first time in years. The manipulations, the calculated behaviors, the exploitation of my love and guilt, all laid bare in this moment of crisis. I think I said slowly that I need some time to process everything that has happened today. Of course, Tara said quickly. Take all the time you need. We will clean up this mess. She gestured to the clothes strewn across the bedroom floor and presumably the lawn below. And we will put everything back exactly as it was, James added eagerly. I nodded, suddenly exhausted by their transparent attempts to backpedal. I am going to call Barbara, I said, referring to my longtime friend who was also an attorney. An attorney? Tara's voice rose in alarm. There is no need for lawyers, Peggy. We are family. Nevertheless, I replied, I think legal advice is appropriate given the circumstances. I left them standing in my bedroom and went downstairs to the kitchen. With hands that had finally begun to tremble, I dialed Barbara's number. Peggy, her familiar voice, answered. Is everything okay? You never call during work hours. I need your help, I said simply, and then explained the situation. Barbara listened without interrupting, and when I finished, her response was immediate and firm. Do not let that ticket out of your sight. I am coming over right now, and we are going to secure it in my office safe until we can meet with lottery officials. By the time Barbara arrived 20 minutes later, James and Tara had undergone a complete transformation. My clothes had been retrieved from the lawn and folded neatly on my bed. Items they had packed for taking were returned to their proper places. Tara had made coffee and was offering it with a solicitous smile that looked painful in its falseness. Barbara, never one for social niceties when business was at hand, cut straight to the point. I understand there has been some confusion about the ownership of a winning lottery ticket. A simple misunderstanding, Tara said quickly. We were all excited and got carried away. Barbara ignored her, turning to me. Peggy, do you have the ticket and receipt? I handed them to her, and she examined them carefully before placing them in a secure envelope. As Peggy's attorney, I will be holding these documents in our firm's safe until we can meet with lottery officials to claim the prize properly, she announced. Any attempt to interfere with this process could result in legal consequences. We would never, James protested, looking wounded. Barbara gave him a look that could have frozen boiling water. Really, because throwing someone's personal belongings out a window and telling them to go die in a nursing home could certainly be construed as interference, not to mention elder abuse. Tara blanched visibly. That was just a misunderstanding in the heat of the moment. A moment that has been recorded in my notes and will be documented in an affidavit, Barbara replied coolly. Now, I suggest you both give Peggy some space while we sort this out. But we live here, James said weakly. A situation that may need to be reassessed given recent events, Barbara countered. For now, I recommend you find alternative accommodations for a few days. After Barbara left with the secured ticket, an uncomfortable silence filled the house. James and Tara whispered urgently to each other in corners, occasionally approaching me with forced smiles and awkward attempts at reconciliation. Mom, we really are sorry, James said, for perhaps the 10th time that evening. We got carried away with the excitement. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw the desperate calculation behind his apology. There was no genuine remorse, only fear of losing access to the money. I think I would like some privacy tonight, I said finally. Perhaps you could stay with friends for a few days while I consider next steps. Next steps, Tara repeated anxiously. What does that mean? It means I need time to think, I replied simply. They left reluctantly, taking only overnight bags and promising to check in the following day. As the door closed behind them, I felt a strange mixture of grief and relief wash over me. The house was quiet for the first time in years, but the silence carried the weight of painful revelations. I walked slowly through each room, seeing clearly the evidence of their 7-year occupation. The changes to my home, the missing items, the spaces no longer recognizably mine. But more painful was the recognition of how completely I had been used by the two people I should have been able to trust most in the world. That night, sitting in Michael's old armchair by the fireplace, I made a decision. The lottery win was not just about money. It was an opportunity for reclamation, a chance to rebuild what had been systematically dismantled over 7 long years. The next morning, Barbara arrived with paperwork and a plan. We would meet with lottery officials that afternoon to verify my claim. The process would take time, she warned. There would be investigations to confirm the ticket's validity, paperwork to file decisions to make about payment options. And what about James and Tara? I asked. Barbara's expression softened slightly. That is entirely up to you, Peggy. Legally, the money is yours. How much, if any, you choose to share is your decision. When James and Tara returned that afternoon, they found Barbara and me waiting in the living room with documents spread across the coffee table. What is all this? Tara asked, eyeing the papers suspiciously. The beginning of my financial reorganization, I replied calmly. Please sit down. We need to talk. They sat uneasily on the edge of the sofa, exchanging nervous glances. I have met with lottery officials, I began. They have confirmed that I am the legal owner of the winning ticket. After taxes, the lump sum payment will amount to approximately $43.5 million. Tara leaned forward eagerly. That is wonderful news, Peggy. When do we get our share? The presumption in her question confirmed everything I needed to know about her character. There is no our share, I said quietly. The money is legally mine. But we are family, James protested. You cannot just keep it all yourself. I have supported you both for 7 years, I reminded them, during which time you have contributed nothing financially to this household. By my calculations, you have cost me nearly $100,000 in additional expenses. They had the grace to look momentarily ashamed, though I suspected it was more performance than genuine remorse. After careful consideration, I continued, I have made some decisions. First, I will be reclaiming my home. You have 2 weeks to find alternative housing. 2 weeks, Tara gasped. That is impossible. Secondly, I went on, ignoring her outburst. I am prepared to give you a one-time gift of $250,000 to help you establish yourselves independently. This is not an inheritance or an entitlement, but a gift that comes with conditions. Conditions? James repeated warily. Yes. You will both need to seek employment or education within 3 months of receiving these funds. The money is to be used for housing, education, or legitimate business investment, not leisure or luxury purchases. Barbara has drawn up papers to that effect. Tara's face had turned an interesting shade of red. You are putting conditions on money that should rightfully be shared with your family. After everything we have done for you, I met her gaze steadily. What exactly have you done for me, Tara? Besides reorganizing my home without permission, criticizing my choices, isolating me from friends, and most recently throwing my belongings out a window. She had no answer to that. The alternative, I said when the silence had stretched uncomfortably long, is that you receive nothing. The choice is yours. James looked genuinely shocked. You would cut off your only son. My only son, I said softly, effectively cut me off years ago when he chose to stand by while his wife systematically dismantled my life and home. The question is not whether I would cut you off, James. The question is whether you are willing to rebuild what has been broken on new, healthier terms. I slid the papers across the coffee table toward them. Take some time to think about it. The offer stands for 1 week. As they left stunned and subdued, I felt no triumph, only a quiet certainty that I had finally taken back control of my life. The road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in 7 years, it was mine to choose. 3 months after that fateful day, my life had transformed in ways I could never have imagined. The lottery win, while life-changing in its financial impact, was secondary to the personal reclamation that followed. James and Tara did eventually sign the agreement, accepting the conditions attached to their financial gift. Their attempts to reconcile once the truth about the ticket emerged were transparent in their insincerity, filled with statements like, "We always knew you would do the right thing, and family has to stick together." I maintained a polite but firm distance, no longer susceptible to their manipulations. They purchased a modest condominium across town, far less grand than the lakeside mansion Tara had envisioned. James enrolled in coding classes at the community college, finally pursuing the technical interests he had abandoned years ago. Tara reluctantly took a position teaching yoga at a local studio, her dreams of luxury living without work abruptly curtailed. Our relationship remained strained but civil. I invited them for monthly dinners, establishing clear boundaries about the frequency and nature of our contact. James occasionally called just to talk, a halting attempt to rebuild some semblance of the mother-son relationship we once had. These conversations were awkward but represented tiny steps toward healing. As for me, the first thing I did after receiving the lottery funds was to secure my financial future. I worked with a team of advisors to create a conservative investment portfolio that would sustain me comfortably for the rest of my life while preserving capital for charitable causes I cared about. The second thing I did was reclaim my home. I hired contractors to renovate every room that held painful memories of those 7 years. Walls were repainted, floors refinished, furniture replaced. I preserved the elements that connected me to Michael and our happy years together, but removed every trace of the unhappy occupation that followed. The most meaningful project was the creation of the Michael Harrison Memorial Scholarship at the local community college, providing educational opportunities for older adults returning to school. Michael had always believed in the power of education at any age, and this felt like a fitting tribute to his memory. With my financial security assured and my home restored, I turned my attention to rebuilding the life that had been put on hold for 7 years. I reconnected with old friends, joined community organizations, and even took a watercolor painting class I had always been interested in, but never pursued. Elaine, my loyal friend who had seen through James and Tara's behavior from the beginning, was a steadfast presence during this transition. We traveled together to the national parks. Michael and I had always planned to visit, checking items off the bucket list we had created together before his death. You know, Elaine said one evening as we watched the sunset over the Grand Canyon, Michael would be so proud of you. For winning the lottery, I asked with a small smile. No, she replied seriously. For finding your strength, for reclaiming your life. Her words touched something deep within me. The lottery win had not given me strength. It had merely created the circumstances that allowed me to rediscover the strength that had been there all along, buried under years of manipulation and self-doubt. The most profound change was internal. I began to recognize the patterns that had allowed the situation with James and Tara to develop in the first place. My reluctance to set boundaries, my willingness to tolerate disrespect in the name of family peace, my fear of confrontation. Through therapy and self-reflection, I worked to address these patterns. Dr. Susan, my therapist, helped me understand that my generosity had been exploited precisely because it was genuine. Your capacity for giving is not the problem, she explained. The problem was allowing others to take without reciprocity or respect. Learning to balance compassion with self-protection became my ongoing practice. I remained generous with my resources, donating to causes I believed in, and helping friends in genuine need. But I no longer allowed myself to be taken advantage of. One year after the lottery win, I hosted a garden party in my beautifully restored backyard. Friends, new and old, gathered to celebrate not just my good fortune but my personal renaissance. James attended without Tara, who claimed a prior commitment. It was the first time we had spoken one-on-one in months. The place looks amazing, Mom, he said, surveying the flowering gardens I had replanted with my own hands. Thank you, I replied. It feels like home again. A moment of uncomfortable silence stretched between us before he spoke again. I have been thinking a lot about the past 7 years, he said hesitantly. About how I let things get so out of hand. How I stood by while Tara treated you badly. I waited, giving him space to continue. I was weak, he admitted, his voice cracking slightly. Somewhere along the way, I lost myself. Lost sight of the values you and Dad raised me with. It was the first genuine acknowledgement he had made without excuses or deflection. The coding classes are going well, he continued after composing himself. I have an internship lined up for the fall. It feels good to be working towards something real again. I am glad to hear that, James. Tara and I are in counseling, he added. Things between us are complicated, but I am working on finding my own voice again. I nodded, recognizing the difficult journey he was undertaking. That takes courage. As he walked away to greet an old family friend, I felt a cautious hope for his future. Not a naive hope based on wishes, but a realistic one grounded in the small evidence of growth I had witnessed. Later that evening, as the party wound down and guests departed, I found myself alone in the garden Michael and I had planted together decades earlier. The roses he had loved were blooming again after years of neglect. I had restored them with patient care, much as I was restoring my own life. The lottery win had not been about the money, I realized. It had been about value, about worth. For 7 years, I had allowed others to determine my worth, to treat me as if I had none beyond what I could provide. The winning ticket had simply forced a reckoning, bringing to the surface truths that had simmered below for years. True wealth, I had learned, was not measured in millions, but in self-respect, in the courage to stand up for oneself, in the wisdom to offer second chances without enabling harmful behavior, in the strength to rebuild what had been broken, whether relationships or rose gardens. As I gathered empty glasses from garden tables under the soft glow of string lights, I felt a profound sense of peace. The road ahead would still have its challenges. My relationship with James would require ongoing navigation. Tara might never truly change. But I had changed, and that made all the difference. The money from the lottery would eventually be spent or passed on to causes I believed in. But the lessons I had learned about my own worth, about standing firm in the face of disrespect, about the difference between generosity and martyrdom, those would remain more valuable than any financial windfall. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against people you loved? How did you find the strength to set boundaries without closing your heart completely? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need encouragement to reclaim their own worth. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Remember, it is never too late to begin again, to rediscover your value, and to create the life you deserve.